The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Mid-Coast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Mid-Coast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. A motion about industrial land use divided Nanaimo City Council in a narrow 5-4 vote Monday night. On the meeting agenda, the motion from Councillor Paul Manly asked staff to prepare a zoning amendment that would have prevented 6 industrial-scale uses, including certain garbage incineration facilities, chemical plants, petroleum refineries, and liquefied natural gas export facilities. The motion council ended up debating instead asked for staff to prepare a report with options on a zoning amendment to exclude emissions-intense heavy industries, listing several examples which would then require site-specific zoning. That motion narrowly passed 5-4. Voting in favour were councillors Paul Manly, Tyler Brown, Ben Gheselbrecht, Erin Hemmens, and Hilary Eastmure. Voting against were councillors Janice Perrino Ian Thorpe, Sheryl Armstrong, and Mayor Leonard Krog. 2 delegations spoke to the motion, one from Dr. Bethany Ricker, a family physician in Nanaimo who spoke in support, and one from Ryan Prontak, maintenance and engineering manager with the Nanaimo Forest Products-owned Harmac, who spoke in opposition. On today's program, we'll hear from Harmac CEO Paul Sadler, who said he feels his enterprise is directly targeted by the motion. But first, Paul Manly came to the CHLY studio to speak about the issue. Where did this motion come from? What made you bring it to the council table?
Thanks for having me in for an interview. This is something I've been thinking about for quite a while. We've had proposals at Duke Point for chromium plants. There's been 3 waste garbage incinerators proposed. The last one was in 2012. We've had proposals for gas-fired electrical generation. And every one of these proposals, the community has risen up and opposed. And the last time we had a waste generator, a garbage incinerator proposed for Duke Point, the NDP MLAs were marching along with everybody else. And there's an opportunity here to change our industrial zoning so that any emissions-intense industries that came to town would have to go through site-specific zoning. We just had this debate over the data center. We've been having a discussion about the data center. That was something that was decided in 2022 before I was a councillor. It was the first 3 readings happened, and then 4th reading I voted against because I couldn't get any new information about water use, energy use, etc. And data centers have to be a site-specific use in Nanaimo. So if we're going to get another one, there has to be a public hearing. There has to be input from the community. We have an ability to ask questions, answer questions. And I think that that's an important democratic process. So that's what I was looking for the same thing for our industrial zoning. Right now it's carte blanche. Anything goes. So we could see garbage incinerators. We could see chromium plants. We could see petrochemical plants, all kinds of different things that would add to the toxic chemicals in our airshed.
Now your motion for a staff report looking into options to do this narrowly passed 5-4. A number of the councillors who voted for it expressed how they were kind of unsure about this. Maybe they would vote for it just because it was only a staff report looking into this. Some of the opposition stated that they felt having these additional rules would essentially be a message to industry that Nanaimo doesn't want you here and that industry would look elsewhere. There were also a number of people from Harmac in attendance in the audience. There was a delegation from Harmac. There was a perception shared that perhaps Nanaimo City Council isn't supportive or welcoming of Harmac. How would you respond to some of that opposition?
Well, Harmac is an existing business. It's been here since the 1950s. They've made major improvements to their emissions since that time. I mean, the emission standards in the 1950s are very different from what they are now. And so they've improved their emissions by over 90%, which is a good thing. Because previously their smokestacks were putting dioxins and furans into the environment, and more sulfur dioxide than human health can handle, really. So what does the community want? What kind of business do we want to attract here? And if we're looking at thinking about things like high tech or healthcare technology, or attracting businesses to this community because of the quality of life that we have here, the fact that you can go mountain biking after work or kayaking after work, or there's lots of parks and recreation spaces. Do we want to keep that quality of life, or do we want to slowly chip away at it by adding more industries? And I would give you the examples of Dawson Creek, where it's become a sacrifice zone, where the doctor who came and spoke last night talked about all of the different health cases that are, cancers and things like that in children that are much higher than average in other communities. Or the community of Kitimat, where they have an Elcan aluminum smelter, they have a pulp mill, and now they have LNG export facility, where they have a 100-meter tower that is flaring and flares as high as 30, 60, 100 meters, and people step outside and they say it smells like burning plastic. It's pouring benzene into the atmosphere, into the air shed, and that's a known carcinogen. It causes cancer. It's putting nitrogen oxide into the air shed, and that's known to cause asthma, COPD, all kinds of respiratory problems. So when you look up these chemicals and persistent organic pollutants and volatile organic chemicals and nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide, you look at what the health risks are behind this. And so Kitimat has become a sacrifice zone. The Ulican Run was destroyed. The Kitimat River used to be a prolific salmon run, and Ulican Run, it's no longer like that. People in the Haisla community can't harvest shellfish or salmon in the direct vicinity of their village. They have to go down channel to be able to do that because everything's been poisoned. And what is the price of human health? Where is the line between economic development and economic growth and wealth generation and human health and the health of the environment?
Now, another point brought up by the delegation from Harmac on this is that Canada has environmental regulations. Any business looking to come here would have to go through provincial and federal bureaucracy and get approval from them, and that municipal staff and politicians wouldn't necessarily have the kind of expertise to weigh in on this. What is your response to that?
Yeah, that's not a municipal responsibility. But what I would also say is that they don't do enough looking at the cumulative effects of having multiple industries like that side by side. There are standards for each one of those individual mills. And then when industries produce more toxins and put those into the air shed or into the water, who is monitoring that and reporting on that? And does the government actually do a good job of making sure that they're following those standards? I would argue that they don't. And I would argue that right now we have a provincial government and federal government that seem to be hell-bent on promoting industries that are unhealthy for the planet. So, fracking in the Northeast is drawing all kinds of water from the water table and making it toxic and pumping it down into fracking wells, and so they're going into a drought. It's we have so many fracking wells up there that it's causing earthquakes in that zone. So it's become a sacrifice zone, and those environmental standards that the provincial government and the federal government have aren't protecting that region at all. It's all being sacrificed in the name of the economy and of wealth generation, and that wealth generation tends to actually go to the 1%. So you look at who owns these pipelines, who owns these facilities. LNG Canada is owned by 5 foreign multinationals. 2 of them are state-owned corporations, from PetroChina from China and Petronas from Malaysia. The other ones are just big foreign multinationals, Mitsubishi, Korea Gas, and Shell, Royal Dutch Shell. So who's benefiting? We see pipeline proposals where it's going to be American billionaires who own the PRGT pipeline, who own the Gheselbrecht LNG facility. So sure, we get these low royalty rates for extraction of the gas, and there will be jobs building stuff. I mean, the Gheselbrecht's LNG facility is actually being built in Korea, so it's not even Canadian steel or Canadian aluminum. So, these arguments that we get about economic benefit, or that we're going to be protected by government with environmental regulations, they just don't hold water for me.
There were a number of people from Harmac in attendance at the meeting, and speaking with some of them after the fact, they shared that there was a sentiment of this motion was meant to address a bunch of what ifs that they didn't feel like were necessarily coming to Nanaimo right now, whereas they are there in the community, and they feel almost attacked in a sense by this motion, and they feel a sense of that Nanaimo City Council doesn't support them more generally. How would you respond to that kind of sentiment?
It is about what ifs. It is about what happens if a foreign multinational decides that they want to come in here and build a chromium plant, waste incinerator, and then use investor-state dispute settlements to push that through. It is about what ifs of adding to emissions-intense heavy industries in this community that add more toxins into our airshed. Harmac is an existing business. They've done a good job. They're employee-owned. I'm supportive of what they've done out there, and I'd encourage them to be doing more in terms of the trajectory that they're on for making improvements to make sure that they lower their emissions and keep the highest standards for a pulp mill. I'm supportive of the forest industry, and when I've talked to Paul Sadler from Harmac about what their plans are when they rezone the land out there. They want industries that are connected to Harmac, so more wood-based industries like CMT, mass timber manufacturing, those kind of things, so that the byproducts from sawmills, etc., can go and feed the Harmac mill. Because right now they're starved for fiber supply because the east coast of Vancouver Island, most of the trees that are harvested here are being exported. And you only need to go down to our harbor to watch ships being loaded with raw logs to be exported from this country when they should be being used to feed that mill. And Harmac used to be part of a McMillan Blodell, and it was vertically integrated. So McMillan Blodell had the forest tenures. They owned the land in the ENN land grant, the private managed forest lands. They ran those trees through their mills. They gave the sawdust to Harmac, and they utilized everything in the community. And now that's all been broken up. So you have different landowners, different mill owners, and for both the mills, the Western Forest Products and Harmac. And so you have a break in timber supply and supply for those mills. And I would advocate that we need to actually have more value-added forest industries here. And those value-added industries, should be working in tandem with Harmac to ensure that they get the byproduct, the sawdust and the feedstock for Harmac, because we still need paper.
The proposals you were referring to from the past, things like chromium plants, things like a garbage incinerator that you suggested, there was public outcry when they happened. People were marching in the streets, and then they didn't happen. Why do you feel like this motion is necessary if in the past these controversial projects have been proposed and then didn't end up coming to town?
Well, those were fairly large fights, but at the same time, those were actually Canadian proposals. So the last waste incinerator, the garbage incinerator, was from Metro Vancouver. They wanted to ship all their waste over here to be burned. If that was in partnership with a company called Wheelabrator, an American corporation. If Wheelabrator had bought the land at Duke Point, come with this proposal, and we said no, then they could have launched an investor-state dispute settlement under Chapter 11 of NAFTA and sought the loss of potential profit for us blocking them. And we've seen these NAFTA, like the previous NAFTA agreement, where, for example, Bilcon failed an environmental assessment and then turned around and demanded compensation for a project that nobody in the community wanted. And the Canadian government said, your environmental assessment has failed. And they sought $450 million in that range for compensation for the loss of potential profit. They walked away with only $7 million, but they should have got nothing. In fact, they should have had to pay the legal fees for the government of Canada. But that's how this system works. We've seen it with Ethyl Corporation when they had an additive in gasoline that was a neurotoxin. When Canada banned that neurotoxin, Ethyl Corporation walked away with millions of dollars for the loss of potential profit because we didn't want their toxic stuff in our gas. So that's why I think it's important to do this now, to make sure that we have control locally, democratic control over what happens in our heavy industry zone and what kind of emissions are poured into our airshed.
As mentioned before, this passed narrowly 5-4 for the staff report. A number of the people who were on council speaking against it spoke with some passion. Do you feel like this motion burned up a lot of political capital and maybe even influenced, say, the votes on the motions that followed it? And what do you feel like is the consequence of that?
Well, I think like the motions that followed it, the other motion I had was just about trying to ensure that companies that are using noxious products and venting them are far enough away from residential areas. And this is based on a number of complaints that we had. We have industrial zones that are kind of broken up all over the city, and that's part of the amalgamation thing. I don't think I've burned political capital on this, really. Like we've, not in city council, maybe with workers at Harmac, I don't know. But we disagree on all kinds of different things at the council level. And one of the things I appreciate about this council is that we can disagree on things, but we're still respectful to each other. There was some heated debate from some parties, and at the end of the night, it was like, have a good night, see you later, and carry on to the next thing. We've had heated debates in the past, and some people have a little more passion that they throw into things than others, and that's politics. But at some point I may table a motion that the people that oppose this motion will favor, and it's actually, it comes down to how you feel about a particular issue, or what your concerns are, and whether you understand those concerns or not. Incidentally, this morning, the first thing that popped up in my news feed was an article in The Guardian about how 2 billion people on the planet are under threat. Their health is under threat by the increase in fossil fuel production, by their proximity to fossil fuel refineries, fracking wells, flaring, all of this stuff, that 2 billion people on the planet, their health care is at risk because of our increased love affair with fossil fuels, and when we could be looking at other solutions. And we just saw reports coming out from COP30 that China has flattened out their emissions. They now produce more renewable energy than all of North America and Europe combined, like double what Europe and North America combined produce. They are producing solar panels and selling them around the world, and we're seeing places like Pakistan shutting down LNG contracts or canceling LNG contracts because of the boom in solar there. And so, North America Canada and the United States has continued to push for more fossil fuel extraction and trying to sell fossil fuels around the world. We've seen China completely outpace us in terms of renewables, in terms of electric cars, and they have beat us in that whole field. And the world is actually going the way that China has, and they've become the manufacturing base for renewable energy and for zero emission vehicles, etc. And so the world is changing, and we need to either figure it out and catch up or just be left behind.
Based on the candor and tone of the way the discussion went around the motion on a staff report, do you have any hope that when that staff report comes back, anything will ultimately come of this? And is there anything you would say to try and move the needle on that?
Well, we'll see what the staff report has to say. And I think, I had written a blog about why I put this motion forward. I posted that blog. I shared it with council before I sent it out. But I think, some councillors really want to see what staff have to say about it. And so we'll see.
And lastly, maybe, is there anything you would say to people who are, say, workers at Harmac, who just feel disavowed more generally with what they feel is the tone or the attitude of members of city council towards industry in the town? Well,
I don't think there's a tone or an attitude towards industry in the town that's existing industry in the town. I said to Harmac, I appreciate what they've done. I appreciate the owner model that they have. And in fact, I mentioned that back when Donald Trump had his first trade war with us, I had connected the trade minister, Chrystia Freeland, with Paul Sadler, the CEO, and Levi Sampson, and one of the majority owners of Harmac, because Harmac was producing PPE, protective personal equipment, with their paper, and that was being exported into the United States, and those are the kind of things that we need. We just need to make sure that when we're considering additional, I appreciate what Harmac does. They provide a service. Well, what we need to do is make sure that if we're adding other heavy industry to this region, that we're considering the cumulative effect of that, and that we have a democratic process that requires site-specific zoning so that we can, as a community, decide how much is too much, how much is enough, and how much is too much in terms of the toxins that are put into our airshed.
Paul Manly, thank you very much for coming down to the studio today.
All right, thanks, Joe. Keep breathing the air.
Nanaimo City Councillor Paul Manly.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
A motion aimed at changing the zoning rules for heavy industry in Nanaimo divided City Council in a 5-4 vote Monday night. Council voted narrowly in favor of receiving a staff report that will explore options to exclude a number of emissions-heavy industrial uses from existing industrial zones. If Council were to later adopt such changes, it would mean certain types of heavy industry that are permitted on industrial land under current rules would instead need to receive approval from City Council for a site-specific use. A large contingent from Harmac Pacific, the one-quarter employee-owned pulp and power generation enterprise in Nanaimo, was in attendance at Monday's council meeting. On Tuesday, I spoke with GM and CEO Paul Sadler. Now, what about this proposed motion around potential industrial zoning changes brought you and a big contingent from Harmac out to Nanaimo City Council on Monday night?
All right, this was a real surprise. I had no knowledge of this particular motion until probably about 10 days ago. And when we looked at the first draft of this particular motion, which was shockingly changed in the hours before the council meeting, but the new motion is very similar. Yeah, it floored us. We had no idea that this was coming. The motion is basically targeted at Harmac. The motion itself is targeted at existing I-4 properties, and there's not a lot of existing I-4 properties in Nanaimo, but we're probably the largest I-4 property owner. So I-4 stands for heavy industry, and again allows for heavy industry activities, which a pulp mill is obviously a good example of that. And again, this motion targets Harmac. We're right in the crosshairs, and in fact, Paul Manly's motion, in promoting his motion, he was, essentially claiming that, emissions from operations like ours are toxic. They're dangerous. They harm the citizens of Nanaimo, and even showed a picture of Harmac on his LinkedIn website, sort of illustrating how, industries like ours are bad news. And I was shocked by this. So
When you suggest that the motion was targeted at Harmac, in speaking with Paul Manly, I got the sense that he suggested the impetus was other projects in Nanaimo's past that had been proposed, such as an incinerator or a chromium plant in the past that sparked opposition. That this was more about what ifs than anything that was going on now. Is that not something that you picked up in any conversations or from the debate itself?
I'm familiar with both of the projects that Mr. Manly's talking about. And, these projects were contemplated decades ago. So these are hypotheticals that are simply unfair examples of what could happen here in Nanaimo. And in fact, the motion is restricting activities that are much more basic. In fact, if we wanted to, if we found ourselves to maintain competitiveness in our business, which is a globally competitive business, we have to find ways of continuing to invest in our operations. We have to make the operation more efficient. That may include one day a need to expand our capacity somewhat. I'm not talking about, tripling our production, but, that's an example. This bylaw would appear to eliminate the opportunity to do that, or we need permission from these councillors to be able to advance our survivability effectively. And that's just one example. I mean, pulp mills are chemical plants, and chemical plants is one thing that's listed as being eliminated from being able to operate on this land. From what I can tell of this particular bylaw, or the bylaw that could potentially come from this motion, it would severely restrict our ability to invest in our business. So it really is a nail in the coffin, so to speak. Maybe not the last nail in the coffin, but just a sort of a continuing kind of pressure from somebody like Mr. Manly to see our business come to an end, and it's mind-boggling. I just don't understand why we provide huge amounts of economic prosperity to Nanaimo. We spend probably $300 million in the community. Certainly that much or more in British Columbia.
Now, the motion that passed on Monday night was for staff to prepare a report with options on the zoning amendment to exclude emissions-intense heavy industries, and then it said such as, it listed a number of different ones. Is there any kind of version of that maybe only includes some of the things listed there? Is there any kind of version of that you could see coming out that you wouldn't feel was sort of a direct attack on Harmac? No,
I don't see that. Within British Columbia, we have very strict requirements and regulations around emissions and the types of things that can be, performed on different lands. And one thing I want to make very clear as well, Mr. Manly, along with the delegate that supported the motion, misled the entire council. You know, there was a comment, more than a comment made, that cumulative effects. So Mr. Manly is basically saying you don't want to have, you know, more than one or two or three businesses producing emissions because the provincial government doesn't pay any attention to this. They don't look at cumulative effects. Well, that's not true. And that's, in fact, what stirred a lot of the support for Mr. Manly's motion, that the government doesn't care about the fact that there's two or three businesses producing emissions in one site and that the citizens are all going to be harmed by this. That is not true at all. The BC Ministry of Environment does conduct cumulative effect studies with projects that go forward. So, again, the largely motivating factor in last night's debate centered around a lack of oversight by the BC Ministry of Environment. That's not true. You know, council's not equipped to, suddenly read a motion and then debate the merits of something as complex as this. The British Columbia government has teams of experts who spend their lives doing this, and to think that the city of Nanaimo can put together a report that accurately considers the impacts of what they're considering, it's mind-boggling. It doesn't make sense. The expense required for professionals to help the city evaluate this, it'll be staggering.
Did you speak with Councillor Paul Manly at all about this motion and express some of your concerns either before or after the meeting?
I certainly didn't talk to him before or after, no. But I can tell you that 1 year ago, a little over a year ago, the forest industry was struggling. This is even before Donald Trump ever got elected, by the way. And the forest industry has been struggling under the current BC NDP because of some very strict policies that have been passed in the last 5 to 6 years. And I approached the city council about a little over a year ago, and I made a request of council to compose a letter to the Premier expressing support for Nanaimo's forest companies. The three of us that operate here, the big players, it's us, it's Coastland, and it's Western Forest Products. And once again, Mr. Manly convinced four other councillors to reject my request. And as much as Mr. Manly says he supports the forest industry, I've yet to see any real action that confirms that's true. Because once again, Mr. Manly and Mr. Gheselbrecht spoke strongly against supporting my request to send a simple letter that they compose to the Premier of the province supporting the forest companies that operate in Nanaimo. Now, Mr. Manly phoned me after that, and he spent an hour on the phone trying to explain why. But once again, none of it was very helpful to me, and it didn't provide me with any comfort that he seriously considered or seriously supported the forest industry in British Columbia, and certainly not here in Nanaimo. So, Mr. Manly, maybe he'll phone me in the days ahead. I don't know. He does do that kind of thing from time to time, and if he phones, I'll gladly engage in the conversation. But this whole thing was a surprise. Again, I only learned about it about 10 days ago.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today on this?
Well, I think it's important to point out that again, industry is an indispensable element of a community's prosperity. We pay high wages. They pay high taxes to the provincial government. We pay taxes to the provincial government when we're profitable, which is most of the time. And it's companies like ours that generally support the economics of a region. And to think that City Council can undermine heavy industry, oil and gas, chemical industries, pulp and paper industries, it's the wrong direction that this community needs to prosper, to deal with our real problems that we've got, which include homelessness, affordability, drug addiction. We have real problems in this community, but it seems to me that we've got councillors that are very motivated to somehow get in the lane of provincial politics. And I think it's wasteful of our community tax dollars. It distracts our staff in the city from doing the right work. My interest is to provide excellent employment, good wages so people can raise their families in homes that they can afford. That's what housing affordability is all about. It's not about building a cheap house that somebody can afford to live in. It's not about providing subsidized housing from a provincial government that's running huge deficits and huge debts. We need to create an economy that's self-supporting, and I don't believe some members of City Council really understand that.
Paul Sadler, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
All right. Thank you, and I'll gladly do this again one day.
Paul Sadler is GM and CEO of Harmac Pacific. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. You can get in touch with us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.